This is Technology-Supported Collaboration, a mini course for IRL. This is Lecture 7, the social dimension to remote collaboration. Welcome back. I'm Joe Constan here with Gary Olson, where we're going to continue talking about the challenge of collaborating, particularly at a distance. In our last lecture, you saw that there were many technological tools that are out there that we could theoretically use to help our collaboration. Well, unfortunately, it's not quite that easy. So we're going to start with where we had left off in the first half of this mini course at Rules of the Road and see how we might construct a communications covenant that goes beyond identifying tools but to the details of how we agree to use them in a way that respects people and their social commitments and needs. So why don't we just start with a quick review of what we meant by Rules of the Road.
Yeah, these were actual written documents that described how you're going to manage important elements of the collaboration, such as data ownership, how decisions are going to get made, who gets credit, and so on and so on. And I mentioned a few examples before. The upper atmospheric physicists had Rules of the Road for their CDARS was the name of their one of their consortia, and they wanted to talk about how we're going to manage all this data we collect and who gets access to it and who gets credit and who gets on publications and so on. And they just wrote this stuff out. And later, when we intervened with them and made everything online, they realized they had to revise this and so on. I also mentioned the Pritzker project, where they tried to work out what they called a Pritzker covenant. This just shows you the first page of it. It was something like 10 pages long. A marvelous activity to work out this plan that then people wouldn't buy into. And so, the project didn't work in that sense.
And we can see that, right up front, they're dealing with, let's get some common terminology, let's talk about data ownership and all of the issues that were logistics you need to make a collaboration, a commitment.
Right.
So what about that next step? What do we mean when we're talking about a communications covenant?
Well, we talked earlier when we talked about the various technologies that you have all these resources available, but as Joe stressed, that the technology is a set of tools. You got to figure out how do we use these tools? How do we think about, how often are we going to meet? How are we going to meet? Are we going to meet face-to-face? Are we going to meet on Hangouts or Skype or whatever? What happens if I miss a meeting and so on? If I send email to my colleagues, what's my expectation about how quickly they're going to respond? And we recognize people can be busy or whatever, and we've taught our people to say, I got your message, I can't deal with it right now, I'll get to you in the next 24 hours. I just said that this morning to somebody. And then, who gets what kinds of messages? And now with the small project that you'll have, that's probably not quite so critical, but as the project gets larger, who gets to use the tools, who gets messages, and so on. And we've seen lots of issues where people send a key message to somebody and they forget to include the other people in the project, and then they get all out of sync on who knows what about some critical issue. And then how do we manage all these things? I mean, if you are creating documents, spreadsheets, whatever, what are we going to call them? Where are they going to be? How can I find them? Do we keep track of versions, or only so I can go back and look at earlier versions if I need to, or do I only have the final version available? All kinds of things like that. You need to kind of make decisions about how you're going to manage all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the technology tools can help some of this. They're not going to help all of this. The Google applications that we're using, if you store things there, you can see old versions, but the granularity of that is not what we would think of as version 1, version 2. It's, here was a set of edits made this date. And if you actually want to say, wait a minute, when we've come to an agreement on version 1, let's save that, you're going to have to do that explicitly. And similarly, it has the ability to organize things into folders or not. If one of you is a heavy folder user and one of you is somebody who puts everything at the top level, you're going to have to make some agreements as to how you do this stuff.
Well, and are we going to share these things by sending around by email, or are we going to put them on a shared repository like a Dropbox or something like that? I mean,
Yeah,
those are things you have to work out.
that's why we're giving you Google Drive, but it doesn't mean that you won't have anything that you keep locally on your own computer. So all of these are critical issues, and the mailing list ones as well. We do give you the ability to add other people to your project mailing list and give them access to your Google Drive space, because we know that you may have a postdoc or a student or an assistant or somebody who works with you who's going to be part of the overall project, even if they're not one of the individual fellows. But understanding within your team what goes on is critical, and maybe the most critical is in a team of 3 people, anytime 2 of them are communicating and the third one doesn't know, you've got to ask the question, are we creating a problem?
And very likely you are.
Yeah.
Very likely you are.
As soon as you start to assume, well, this other person doesn't need to know, you're probably getting into trouble.
Because you don't know whether they need to know. You may think they don't need to know now, but tomorrow they do need to know.
Yeah. So there are lots of examples of covenants, and I know that you're providing us with some examples that are loaded into our Moodle for people to read in case
Yeah.
they don't have the talent of reading half-point fonts
Yeah.
on the screen. Though if you have that talent, I'm sure you see some interesting things in here. But what is it really? I mean, we could have called this just a communication plan. What makes this really, why a covenant?
It's a covenant because it sets up how you're gonna do things, and everybody has to agree to do it. And there have to be consequences if you don't do it. So the communication covenant ought to say, we're gonna have meetings scheduled by some mechanism. Either we're gonna have a standard time, or we'll do the following protocol for scheduling up meetings. What if I miss? What's my penalty if I miss? What if I am late? Someone showing up for a meeting late is a real pain for the rest of the people, because you have to catch them up and so on, or they've missed some key things. All those things have real consequences for a collaboration. And so part of the covenant is to work out how are you going to deal with that. You have to buy your colleagues a beer if you're late for a meeting, or if you fail to respond to an email in a timely way? What are the consequences? And in the examples that I'll give you, that Joe mentioned, you'll see some instances, you'll see some ways people have handled this. The reality is, you're going to be working on this thing for 3 years, and people are going to take vacations, people are going to get ill, people are going to have surprises, something comes up that they hadn't anticipated, and you have to have ways of dealing with these kinds of things. It can be really frustrating if the 2 of us we got some big thing and we need you and we can't find you, and we need to know how we're going to manage that kind of situation. So you're probably going to have to keep people informed about, look, I'm gone the next 2 weeks. I won't have any email. I'll catch up when I get back. Or if you get ill, let people know that I'm sorry. I won't be reading email for a few days. Here's why. Just things like that, so your colleagues know what to expect.
Well, and some of this may even involve recognizing that as you become interdependent, there are things that you let people know about before you plan them and not just after. You might say, gee, I'm thinking of taking a vacation at this time. Let them know before you book the tickets if they're going to say, wait a minute, that's when we thought we were going to do the field study.
Right.
You can't be gone for the field study. And then you have a discussion. Well, can we do the field study the next week? Yeah, I guess we could. And the key is to have that discussion. We should point out, not everything has to be draconian. Sometimes these things can even have elements that are fun. It might be perfectly reasonable to say, you know what, this particular weekly meeting, our goal is that you get there at least 3/4 of the time, but we recognize people have other commitments. We're going to check once a quarter, and if somebody's not showing up enough, we're going to revisit what's going on and whether there's sufficient commitment. Whereas if you have a major session where you're writing a proposal, the consequences might be much stronger for having other people who set out special time and now it's not available.
And one of the reasons we stress this is we've had a lot of success with this. We have had projects that last for, a matter of weeks or maybe a matter of years, and we've inevitably gotten the feedback toward the end that one of the most valuable things you did was have us write out a communication covenant, because it really made all the difference in keeping things running smoothly. So these things really work. We have a lot of experience with them.
And maybe the last point is, write them on a computer or maybe on paper, but not in stone. You're writing this thing, you
Right.
then live it, and when you live it, you realize this
Yeah.
isn't working. Sit down and say,
Modify
hey,
it.
let's change our covenant. But make sure that when you change it, you go back and you've got buy-in and agreement from everybody, and
Right.
you're happy with trying it the new way. Every group I've been in has changed rules along the way as people change and their circumstances change, and that's all okay.
So I'm gonna provide not only some examples of these from some past projects, but we're gonna give you a template of kind of things that you want to consider in the covenant. So you'll have some material to work with when you develop your own, and developing your own will be one of the things we ask you to do.
Yes, in the very last piece of the class. But before that, our next step is going to be looking at bridging gaps and building common ground. It's the first of 2 lectures that look at best practices and things that will help your distributed interdisciplinary team succeed. And we'll see you there. This has been Technology Supported Collaboration Lecture 7, The Social Dimension to Remote Collaboration.